The moment Keller stepped onto the surface of Scylla Prime, the planet seemed to size him up. The air was heavy, the sky a swirling canvas of molten orange and rust red, streaked with flashes of pale lightning. Volcanic ridges erupted from the landscape like ancient scars, their jagged edges lined with veins of glowing minerals that pulsed faintly in the dim light. A brittle wind stirred clouds of ash into the air, stinging his face and settling into the folds of his gear. If a world could have a personality, Scylla Prime's was hostile. Aggressively so. Keller took a long, steady breath. He'd read the reports, seen the half-dozen grainy images smuggled out by the few who made it back alive. A place where the air could burn your lungs, the soil could sear your skin, and the wildlife regarded all other life forms as either food or intruders. His boots sank into a sandy mix of volcanic glass and dust, and with each step, the ground crunched ominously. The ship's engines roared behind him, a muted thrum through his helmet as it lifted off. They wouldn't wait for him. That was part of the deal. Come back in 1 year or don't come back at all. No one had bothered to tell him, good luck. A few hundred meters from the landing site, Keller paused. Ahead, the land fell away into a deep gorge. Beyond it, the terrain rose into a maze of ridges where his scanning drones had already mapped scattered ruins. More importantly, they'd marked the territory where the Scyllan behemoth had last been seen. Keller could picture it in his mind, a massive six-legged predator with scaled color-shifting skin and a serrated maw. He'd watched the recordings made by the last expedition. The way it moved, fast, deliberate, and unnervingly intelligent. Its appearance always seemed to come without warning, ending the hunt before it had truly begun. Keller wasn't here for that hunt, not in the traditional sense. While other hunters brought massive energy rifles and specialized traps, Keller's most dangerous tool was a simple machete strapped to his thigh. His primary cargo was lighter, crates of nutrient-rich soil, durable seed packets, and rolls of transparent radiation-resistant sheeting. In place of combat drones, he had simple flying probes designed to map the terrain, study weather patterns, and track wildlife movements. Keller's plan didn't involve killing the behemoth. At least, not directly. Not yet. He reached a small plateau overlooking the gorge. From here, he could see the blackened forest that clung stubbornly to life in the valleys. There, dense tangles of thorny growth formed the habitat of Scylla Prime's lesser predators. Those creatures were vicious, but manageable. Each one, a stepping stone toward the true prize. Keller knelt and began setting up his first weather shield, a lightweight dome that could withstand the planet's acidic rains. He didn't need much protection, just enough to give his seeds a chance to sprout. As he worked, a familiar sound reached him, the low, distant roar of the behemoth. The vibrations rattled the air like a low-grade earthquake. Keller didn't flinch. He looked up, squinting toward the horizon. The sound didn't mean it was nearby. The creature's call could carry for miles. It was a warning to anything smaller than it, and on this world, that included everything else. Keller smiled faintly, as though the sound was more reassuring than frightening. He'd studied this planet for years. He knew that the behemoth was the apex predator here, not just because of its size, but because it was a product of its environment. It thrived where everything else struggled, and if he could learn to adapt even a fraction as well, he wouldn't just survive. He'd build something no one else dared to imagine. He locked the weather shield in place and stood, dusting off his gloves. Above him, the red sky roiled with energy, as if the planet itself was testing his resolve. All right, he murmured to himself, and the first group of alien hunters arrived with fanfare and bravado. 3 heavy landers settled into a broad stretch of cracked earth not far from where Keller had begun his work. The ship's cargo bays spilled out gleaming equipment, seismic, lures to draw the behemoth, long-range plasma rifles, drones armed with nets and corrosive sprays. The hunters themselves, 6 aliens clad in composite armor, emerged with the swagger of seasoned predators. Some of them carried scars from previous expeditions, marks they flaunted with pride. They were here for a kill, not a conversation, and certainly not to exchange survival tips with a solitary human farmer. Keller watched their arrival from a distance. He leaned against the rough trunk of a tree-like plant, some resilient woody organism that had managed to endure Scylla Prime's hostile climate. From under his wide-brimmed helmet, he noted the hunters' movements. They were cautious at first, moving in tight formations, but confidence returned quickly as they scanned the area and found no immediate threats. One of the hunters even laughed, a booming, guttural sound that carried through the thin, acrid air. "They always start that way," Keller muttered under his breath. He turned back to his fields. In the weeks since his own arrival, Keller's farm had begun to take shape. Rows of broad-leafed crops pushed up through the volcanic soil. A series of weather shields covered the more delicate seedlings, their translucent domes protecting against the frequent corrosive rains. Keller had also built several irrigation channels, diverting a small nearby stream into his planting areas. The stream was fed by a geothermal spring, its water warm and rich with minerals, perfect for supporting rapid plant growth if carefully managed. What struck Keller as odd, even amusing, was how the hunters paid no attention to him. He wasn't the competition. They dismissed him as a fool playing at farming, a relic of a bygone era when the weak clung to agrarian lifestyles. These hunters came from wealthy, technologically advanced societies where food grew in vats, and the thrill of the hunt was a status symbol. They carried gear more expensive than most small starships, designed specifically for the Scylan behemoth, the ultimate trophy. Yet despite their confidence, the hunters' first encounter with the behemoth ended quickly and brutally. It came in the dead of night, when the hunters were resting in their reinforced shelters. Keller was awake. He had learned to sleep in short shifts, rising every few hours to adjust irrigation lines or check his crop monitors. He heard the tremor first, a faint rumbling in the ground. Then came the roar, distant but unmistakable. The behemoth wasn't roaring at the hunters' camp. It was signaling its territory as it had done countless times before. But the hunters, misunderstanding the sound, thought they'd been discovered. They scrambled to arm themselves, activating their seismic lures and deploying their drones. They lit up the night with spotlights and thermal scans. The behemoth, drawn to the vibrations and noise, approached with terrifying speed. Its massive form blurred against the darkness, its skin shifting colors to match the terrain as it closed in. By the time the hunters saw it, they had already lost their advantage. Their traps misfired. Their plasma rifles did little more than scorch the creature's outer layers. One by one, the hunters fell. The survivors fled, leaving behind smoldering equipment and discarded weapons. Within hours, the once proud hunting camp was reduced to a graveyard of shattered gear. The survivors limped back to their ship, their leader nursing a broken arm. The heavy landers lifted off not long after, vanishing into the hazy sky. They didn't even bother to pack their remaining supplies. They just left, running from the nightmare they'd so eagerly sought. When Keller passed the abandoned camp a few days later, he found himself shaking his head. He salvaged what he could: fragments of armor plating to reinforce his greenhouse, leftover ration packs that still held value. The rest he left as it was, a testament to Scylla Prime's brutality. The incident barely registered on the behemoth's part. It had returned to the deep valleys, prowling its domain as though nothing had happened. For Keller, however, the encounter was another reminder. The aliens came with force, expecting dominance. Scylla Prime wasn't a place to dominate. It was a place to understand or to be consumed. Back on his farm, Keller resumed his quiet work. He dug irrigation channels, rotated his crops, and repaired his weather shields. The red sky churned overhead, the wind howling as it always did. The behemoth's occasional roars echoed across the volcanic ridges. To others it was a warning. To Keller it was a part of the landscape, just another sound in the rhythm of life on the Deathworld. Keller first noticed it while watering his crops, an odd sensation like being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and he set down the irrigation hose, scanning the jagged horizon. Scylla Prime's atmosphere always played tricks on the eyes with its rippling heat and smoky haze, but this time was different. The presence felt tangible, as if the planet's most dangerous inhabitant had finally turned its attention his way. It wasn't fear that gripped him, but an odd sense of anticipation. Since the day he landed, Keller had always known this moment would come. The behemoth roamed a vast territory, its six-legged frame carrying it over volcanic ridges and through sulphurous valleys. Keller had caught fleeting glimpses on his drones, recordings, massive scaled limbs that rippled with muscle, a maw filled with jagged teeth and eyes that gleamed with unnerving intelligence. But seeing it from a drone feed was one thing. Knowing it was here now, watching his small farm from just beyond the tree line, was something else entirely. He grabbed his machete and turned toward the outskirts of his farm. The rows of strange, leafy plants swayed in the sulfur-laden breeze, casting shifting shadows in the dim red light. At the far edge of the field, near a line of scrubby, thorny bushes, a movement caught his eye. The behemoth's massive form emerged silently from the haze. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It just stood there. Its scaled body blending almost seamlessly with the surrounding terrain, a monstrous mirage given form. Keller exhaled slowly. He could feel the weight of its gaze, curious, assessing, yet not immediately hostile. He was acutely aware of how vulnerable he was. The machete at his side felt like little more than a toy against a creature that could crush him in a single swipe. The behemoth took a step forward, the ground trembling faintly under its weight. Its clawed feet sank into the dark soil, crushing a patch of low-growing shrubs as it moved closer. Keller held his ground, resisting the urge to retreat. The creature's skin shifted colors as it approached, a slow, deliberate pulsing that seemed less like camouflage and more like a natural rhythm, like a heartbeat displayed on the surface of its body. Keller's mind raced, but he forced himself to focus. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't roaring. Maybe, just maybe, it was here for something else. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, cylindrical container. Inside was a handful of the crop he'd been growing. Tough, fibrous plants engineered to survive in Scylla Prime's acidic soil. Keller had been experimenting with the leaves, pressing them into a nutrient-rich paste. He'd eaten some himself, finding it bitter but nourishing. Now he wondered if it might serve as an offering. Cautiously, Keller set the container on the ground and stepped back. The behemoth tilted its massive head, one of its eyes fixed on the strange object. For a long moment, it didn't move. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it lowered its head and sniffed the container. The air grew still. Keller didn't dare breathe. The behemoth extended a long, forked tongue and snatched the bundle of leaves from the container. It chewed slowly, its powerful jaws grinding the plant matter with a sound like distant thunder. Keller stood frozen, watching every movement, every shift of the creature's massive body. When it finished, the behemoth raised its head and made a low, guttural sound, less a growl and more a deep rumble that resonated in Keller's chest. It was hard to interpret, but it didn't feel threatening. Then, without another glance, the behemoth turned and lumbered off toward the far ridge. Its body shimmered as it moved, blending into the terrain once again. In moments it was gone, leaving only faint footprints in the volcanic soil. Keller stood there, trying to process what had just happened. He hadn't been attacked. He hadn't been chased. The creature had taken his offering and left. It was a small victory, perhaps, but one that opened the door to something more. In the days that followed, Keller continued his work as before, but now he was more deliberate in his actions. Each time he harvested a portion of his crops, he left a small pile of the pressed leaves at the edge of the field. Sometimes the pile would remain untouched, but more often than not, it would disappear. He never saw the behemoth take it again, not directly, but he knew it was watching. The relationship was tenuous, built on an unspoken agreement. Keller wouldn't intrude into the behemoth's territory, and in return, the creature left his farm in peace. Over time, the distant roars that once rattled his nerves became a strange comfort. The behemoth was still out there, still a deadly force, but Keller no longer thought of it as a monster. It was something far more complex, a creature adapting to a world as hostile as any in the galaxy. The behemoth's visits became a strange constant in Keller's life. It didn't come every day, nor did it arrive at any predictable time. Yet Keller always knew when it had been there. The pile of leaves he set out would vanish, replaced by faint, enormous prints pressed into the soil. Sometimes he'd find the remains of smaller creatures near the edge of the field, evidence of the behemoth hunting nearby. Other times he'd wake to a strange stillness, the kind of silence that only came when the creature's massive form lay just out of sight, hidden behind the jagged tree line. Keller grew bolder. He started working closer to the edges of his field, experimenting with new crops and expanding the irrigation channels. When he was certain the behemoth wasn't watching, he built a second greenhouse, this one designed to withstand the frequent ash storms that swept across Scylla Prime. With each new construction, Keller felt the subtle tension between himself and the creature lessen. It was as though they had established an understanding. The human would build and the behemoth would watch, neither interfering too much in the other's existence. The breakthrough came one quiet evening, just before dusk. Keller was inspecting a row of purple-bladed plants, an experimental hybrid he'd engineered to grow quickly in Scylla's volcanic soil. As he worked, he felt the now familiar tremor of the behemoth's approach. This time he didn't freeze or hide. Instead, he glanced up, watching as the massive creature emerged from the mist-shrouded ridgeline. The behemoth moved more slowly than before. It didn't charge into the field, nor did it stalk him like prey. It stopped just short of the greenhouse's edge, its head tilting slightly as it observed Keller's movements. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, but there was no growl, no aggressive display. Keller took a deep breath and turned fully to face it. "All right," he said quietly, not expecting the creature to understand. "If you're going to stick around, we might as well see what you can do." Keller reached into his pack and pulled out one of the alien fruits he'd been cultivating. It was large and dense, encased in a hard outer shell. Keller had cracked them open with tools, but he wondered if the behemoth's incredible strength could serve the same purpose. He tossed the fruit gently toward the creature, the motion slow and deliberate. The behemoth's massive head tracked the arc of the fruit as it landed just a few feet in front of it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, cautiously, the behemoth lowered its head and sniffed at the fruit. Its forked tongue flicked out, and in a single bite the hard shell cracked with a sharp, echoing crunch. The behemoth chewed thoughtfully before swallowing. Its head rose, and for the first time, Keller swore he saw something almost inquisitive in its deep-set eyes. From then on, their interactions changed. The behemoth began appearing more frequently, often at dusk or early dawn. It watched as Keller planted new crops, its massive form casting a long shadow across the farm. At first it kept its distance, but over time, it ventured closer. Keller grew more confident, speaking to it in quiet tones as he worked, leaving small offerings at the field's edge. In return, the behemoth never disturbed his plants, never roared or displayed aggression. And then, one morning, Keller saw something extraordinary. While repairing one of his weather shields, he heard a familiar rumble, a low sound that resonated through the ground. He turned to see the behemoth standing at the edge of the field, a smaller, squirming creature clamped in its jaws. It was one of Scylla Prime's lesser predators, a vicious, reptilian thing that had occasionally raided his crops. The behemoth shook its head, snapping the smaller creature's spine, and then dropped the lifeless body near Keller's field before retreating back to the tree line. Keller stood frozen, staring at the limp predator. Was it a gift? A warning? A sign of something deeper? He couldn't be sure, but it was clear the behemoth no longer viewed him as an enemy, or even as prey. They had reached a fragile equilibrium. In a world where survival was a constant struggle, Keller had become something rare and precious. A partner. He carried the dead predator away from his field, its blood staining the soil, and used it as fertilizer for the newer crops. As the behemoth watched from the distance, Keller felt the faintest sense of understanding pass between them. They had both adapted, each learning to coexist with the other. Keller knew the peace wouldn't last forever. This was Scylla Prime, after all, a planet that tolerated no weakness, no lapse in vigilance. But for now, the human farmer and the monstrous predator had found a balance, and in that fragile partnership, Keller saw a glimmer of hope, not just for survival, but for something more profound. It was no longer just a hunt. It was the start of something new. Months passed, and the farm thrived under Keller's careful hand. The once ash-laden plain now bore rows of broad-leafed alien crops, their vibrant purple and green shades striking against the red-hued horizon. His irrigation system, fed by mineral-rich hot springs, hummed quietly as water trickled through the channels. The greenhouses, cobbled together from scavenged metals and reinforced transparencies, withstood the daily acid rain and sporadic windstorms. In this unlikely setting, Keller had carved out a pocket of life on Scylla Prime, and the behemoth remained close. It no longer lurked at the edges of his fields, but instead moved freely through the rows of crops. It had grown accustomed to his routine, the morning watering, the afternoon pruning, the occasional construction of new weather shields. Keller noted how it moved carefully between the rows, never trampling his plants. It watched his work with a steady, unblinking gaze, a constant, silent presence. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, as Keller adjusted the angle of a solar panel, that he noticed something on the horizon. Distant shapes, bright against the rusty backdrop, descended from the sky, the sharp glint of polished metal unmistakable. He lowered the panel slowly, squinting through the haze. "More hunters," he muttered. He leaned on the panel's frame, staring at the specks as they grew larger and more defined. By the time Keller reached the northern ridge overlooking his farm, the new landing party had set down in the clearing where the previous group had been slaughtered. 3 heavy ships now stood there, larger than the first team's landers, each bristling with weaponry. He could make out figures moving below, aliens in sleek, high-tech armor, deploying drones that hovered and scanned the terrain. This group was far more organized than the last. No scattered gear, no overconfidence. These were professionals, mercenaries perhaps, or military contractors. Keller's heart sank. He'd hoped the disastrous failure of the first group would keep others away. but it seemed the lure of the Scylan behemoth's hide was too great. There was no mistaking their intent. They were here to do what no one else had managed: kill the creature and take its body as a trophy. What they hadn't expected was Keller's farm. It didn't take long for them to notice the cultivated fields, the greenhouses, the irrigation system. Through his binoculars, Keller saw one of the alien leaders stop short at the sight of the orderly rows of crops. The group gathered around, gesturing at the farm. Their confusion was palpable even from a distance. Who had managed this? How and why? As they deliberated, Keller decided to meet them on his terms. He walked down from the ridge, machete sheathed at his side. The late afternoon sun casting his shadow long across the cracked soil. He knew what they must have been thinking. A human, out here on Scylla Prime, farming? It defied their entire reason for coming to this place. When Keller reached them, the aliens turned, their armor gleaming in the reddish light. One of them, taller than the rest and adorned with intricate insignias, stepped forward. Its voice, translated through a sleek device on its chest, was sharp and commanding. "You, human, explain yourself." Keller removed his hat, dusting it off. "It's a farm," he said simply. "And you're trespassing." The alien leader's expression was unreadable beneath its helmet, but the way it tilted its head spoke of disbelief. "A farm? Here? On this cursed world?" "Call it a hobby," Keller replied, his tone calm. He gestured to the fields behind him. "The soil's good if you know how to work it. I've got crops that grow fast, resist the rain, and taste half decent. Even managed to keep the local wildlife out. Most of it anyway." "Where is the creature?" another alien demanded, stepping forward. Its voice was harsher, impatient. "The Scylan behemoth, we know it's here." Keller tilted his head slightly. "And why would I tell you that?" The second alien snarled, its hand resting on the weapon slung across its chest. "Because if you don't, we'll—" "Enough." The leader raised a hand, silencing the subordinate. It turned back to Keller, its tone measured. "We didn't come here for trouble with you, human. We came for the beast. Tell us what you know, and we'll leave you in peace." Keller's lips curled into a faint smile. "You'll leave me in peace, huh?" He glanced at the three ships behind them, at the bristling weapons and the squads of armed aliens. "I don't think peace is what you're after." The leader took a step closer. "The Scylan behemoth has terrorized this planet for decades. We've studied its patterns. We've brought the technology to finish it once and for all. If you have information, share it. If not, stay out of our way." Keller met its gaze, unflinching. "You think you'll do better than the last group?" The leader hesitated. "The last group were amateurs. We are not. Do not compare us to them." Keller chuckled. "Sure, you look more prepared. Better weapons, better tactics." His smile faded, and he folded his arms. "But you still don't understand what you're up against. The behemoth isn't just an animal, it's part of this planet. You kill it and you don't win, you lose." The second alien barked a laugh. "Is that a threat? From a dirt farmer?" "No," Keller said. "It's the truth, but you're welcome to find out for yourselves." For a long moment, neither side moved. The aliens regarded Keller with a mix of confusion, contempt, and reluctant curiosity. Finally, the leader made a curt gesture, and the squad turned away. They wouldn't be dissuaded by words. They would hunt as they had planned, and Keller would be left to his farm, at least for now. As they walked off, Keller watched them go, his gaze drifting toward the distant hills. The behemoth was out there, and it would not be kind to the new arrivals. Keller could only hope that when it was over, his fragile the alien mercenaries began their campaign as if they were conquering a battlefield. Their drones carved precision paths across the volcanic plains, mapping every crevice and cave. They set seismic lures in the valleys and deployed sensor nets, capable of picking up a heartbeat from a mile away. Their weapons gleamed, some crackling with plasma, others humming softly with barely contained power. These were the tools of apex hunters who had conquered beasts across the galaxy. But Scylla Prime was not like any other world, and the behemoth was not like any other prey. From his farm, Keller watched the skies flicker with blue arcs of energy, heard the distant thunderclaps of explosives, and saw faint bursts of light on the horizon. The mercenaries were moving fast, firing off their volleys and tightening their nets. Each time the sounds would grow distant, then fall silent. They were tracking something that didn't behave like a simple animal. The behemoth didn't run blindly. It didn't lash out impulsively. It withdrew, observed, and learned. Within days, their traps were springing empty. The seismic lures stopped transmitting, the sensor nets were torn to ribbons. The mercenaries grew desperate. Keller could see it in the way they clustered near their camp, their drones flitting anxiously. From his ridge, he watched them argue, sharp staccato bursts of alien language that the translation units couldn't keep up with. They weren't just hunting anymore, they were scrambling, and the behemoth was closing in. It came in the deep hours of the night, when Scylla's electric storms tore the sky into jagged pieces. Keller, sitting on the edge of his greenhouse roof, felt it first, the ground trembling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He pulled his goggles down over his eyes and stared toward the distant mercenary camp. The flashes of lightning illuminated, a towering silhouette moving through the haze, its scaled hide shifting in and out of visibility. The behemoth, as always, blended perfectly into the chaos around it, a phantom in a storm. At first, the camp lights snapped on, and Keller saw the mercenaries scramble into position. They were still disciplined, still organized, but even from here Keller could sense their rising panic. Their drones buzzed outward, their weapons locked onto the shadows. The creature moved closer, each step a seismic punctuation. It was unlike the other creatures on Scylla Prime, fierce but predictable. The behemoth was something else. Patient, tactical, almost cruel in its intelligence. When the creature attacked, it did so without warning. One moment the camp was a lit-up fortress of activity. The next, it was a battlefield. The behemoth struck, with terrifying precision, smashing their barricades and scattering their formations. Plasma bolts seared the air and drones exploded in bursts of green flame. The mercenaries fought back hard. These weren't amateurs after all. But no amount of training or firepower prepared them for an enemy that moved through the storm, as if it were part of the storm itself. The fight lasted less than an hour. When the lightning subsided, the camp was in ruins. The few surviving mercenaries limped toward their ships, abandoning the shredded remains of their equipment. Keller could see them retreating, their silhouettes small and beaten as they hauled, their wounded up the ramps of their heavy landers. Soon the engines roared and the ships rose into the sky, disappearing into the swirling clouds. Keller waited until the ground stilled. He climbed down from the greenhouse and approached the edge of his field, scanning the horizon. The behemoth's form was already fading into the distance, its massive body blending into the rugged hills. There was no celebration, no triumphant roar. It simply walked away, vanishing like it had never been there. When Keller reached what was left of the mercenary camp the next morning, he found only scraps. A few damaged weapons lay scattered in the dust, along with shattered pieces of their equipment. Most of it was beyond salvageable, but Keller picked through it anyway. He took what he could use: reinforced plating for his greenhouses, fragments of circuitry that might power a new irrigation pump. The rest he left as it was, a testament to the arrogance of those who thought they could conquer Scylla Prime. Back at his farm, Keller set to work. securing his fields against the next storm. As he worked, he saw the behemoth once more, standing at the edge of the ridge. It was just watching, silent as ever, its massive silhouette cutting against the blood-red sky. Keller paused, raising a hand slightly. Not a wave, but an acknowledgement. The behemoth lingered a moment longer, then turned and lumbered off, disappearing into the distance. Keller smiled faintly and resumed his work. The storm would come again, but the farm would stand. And so would he.